break commercial. This is episode 105, and I'm talking to Sun Sachs, who will introduce in a second. But first, I just want to ask you to please follow me on social media at Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Concussion Doc. Follow my website, concussiondoc.com, and subscribe, rate, review wherever you get your podcasts and on the podcasting app Good Pods. So, and first I'll introduce my sponsor, Head Check Health. So take a pause for that. Sorry, here's Head Check Health. Concussion Talk Podcast is presented by Head Check Health. Head Check Health bridges the gaps in concussion care through simple, powerful technology. Join organizations like the Canadian Football League, Track Factory Racing, the Canadian Junior Hockey League, Eastern Washington University, and Volleyball Canada, who rely on Head Check Health to improve communication and optimize care. Visit headcheckhealth.com for more. Okay, Sun, thank you so much for joining me. And you're the CEO and co-founder of Rewire Fitness. Can you please first introduce yourself more and briefly describe what the Rewire Fitness app is?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on. I'm excited to chat with you. So my background, a lifelong athlete. I was born in Vancouver, BC, but actually grew up in Boulder, Colorado. So spent a lot of time in endurance sports, in cycling primarily, working my way up to an elite level. Ended up getting injured and retiring pretty early, but kept the lifelong passion and performance. And sort of meanwhile, I developed a career in software development. And so those two kind of passions came together around performance and creating products and solutions for athletes. So that's kind of how it got started. But yeah. But in terms of what we do, so when we talk to athletes and we ask them sort of how important is mindset or the mind to performance, they'll always say somewhere between 50 and 95%, depending on the person, the sport, their perspective, right? And then we'll say, well, based on your answer, you must spend a lot of time, training your mind. And that's where there's the awkward silence, because they really are. Yeah, they don't. And how do you do it? And, of course, the traditional way is you just push your body really hard. And maybe as a side effect, you get a little bit of resilience, but that's kind of a blunt instrument, it's not, not very targeted. And so what we really focus on from our type of solution, we look at things holistically from a cognitive performance standpoint. We have a program designed to train the mind really around building mental resilience. We also provide tools for cognitive recovery. That's often overlooked. It's a sort of a blind spot, really with many different types of athletes, even professional, where they may have stressful sort of life factors and not realize how that's impacting their physical performance because they're overloaded mentally. So we want to provide tools for cognitive recovery as well as mind-body recovery. And then, of course, everything has to be measured. So if you're going to try to progress in something, we need to be able to diagnose and understand where you are every day compared to your baseline. And so we have a holistic readiness system as well, which is sort of the diagnosis part, which feeds into a kind of a feedback loop into the recovery system. So in other words, you do your readiness in the morning, we're going to understand your state and recommend something for you to help make the best of your day, regardless of if you've had a bad night's sleep or you're under a lot of stress. We want to give a solution, not just a diagnosis.
Oh, great. Okay, actually, I was hoping to dive more into those three. It's just as I watched the product overview video, and there's three pillars: are train, diagnose, and recover. The three pillars of this program of Rewire Fitness. And I wanted to actually, because I know this is not necessarily an athlete or a sport podcast, but it's about concussions and brain injury recover from that. So, and it's also a lot of the same things. It's the resilience is part of the train, and like the if you could just talk about the train more, this the daily. I know for injuries where there's no consistency in day to day life, is your brain just decides and just reacts to injury, and there's no like building on yesterday because of there is, but there's not like a you're really yesterday better day, better next day because it goes it's a lot more up and down, a lot more dynamic. Because then, but still, there's resiliency. You kind of have to learn every day, kind of train every day. So you talk about the train aspect of your Rewire Fitness program.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. It's a pretty fascinating science. It was one of the big motivators for building the product because in the lab, what they basically do is it's relying on a psychological cognitive phenomenon known as response inhibition, which is essentially a fancy name for impulse control.
Oh,
But it's targeting so it's targeting a very specific part of the brain in the prefrontal cortex called the anterior cingulate cortex.
yeah.
And that part of the brain, fascinatingly enough, is very important for what we call cognitive control. In other words, conscious decision making. It's also very important for self-control. When you're working towards achieving a goal, and it also has been found in a lot of research to be the primary influencer of your perception of effort. So what they found in the lab is they basically had the subjects do, and this was initially the groundbreaking research was in 2009, but it's been repeated quite a lot since then. But basically what they did in the lab is they had the athlete or subject do response inhibition tasks while doing physical training. And what they noticed is that their level of perceived fatigue increased at a higher rate when they were doing the cognitive exercise, either before or during training. And when the athlete basically said, I cannot go any further, then they attached some electromagnetic devices to show that their muscles still had more capacity, thus proving that essentially their brain was limiting their performance because it was under a greater level of fatigue.
Yes.
And when you look at professional athletes, when they do sort of comparisons between amateur and professional, as you might expect, the professional athletes have a greater resilience to cognitive fatigue. So these coincidentally, or maybe not so coincidentally, but just a nice overlap with sort of the concussion space is that I have seen in the research that they'll use the same cognitive tasks that we use to overload the brain as a way to diagnose concussive issues. So the traditional test is called a Stroop test, which you may have tried that in the past. It's basically this interesting, hard to describe, just over voice, but essentially you're looking at words or symbols on the screen, and the impulse is to match color for color. But in one case, you have to look at the color, and in another case, you have to look at just the meaning of the word. So and oftentimes the brain
that'll be a green color,
exactly.
Yeah.
So in our system, what we do is we have a kind of two-dimensional Stroop test where the subject will basically engage with the training. They'll have a number of sort of gamified metrics, like they have a certain amount of time per question to answer. They have to get the goal is to get a certain number correct. So they're doing things sort of on a time frame. And then it ends up being the average workout, 15-20 minutes, is upwards of 1,000 to 1,500 questions. And we call those decisions.
Yeah.
So if you think about how that might tire you out, you're making, 1,500 decisions over a short period of time. What happens then is that the subjects adapt. just like you can do in physical training, you add a level of resilience when you're under cognitive fatigue.
Yes.
So a classic example from the research, they basically took 30 amateur cyclists and they had 15 basically do training 3 times a week for 3 months. And that's it, just on an indoor trainer supervised by the clinician. And then the variant group, they basically did that while also doing this Stroop test, the brain training.
Okay.
And after 3 months, the athletes, all of them, improved because they're consistently training. The control group, or the people that just did the physical training, improved by 40%. And the brain train group on a physical test improved by 120%. And specifically what that was is it's called to a time to exhaustion test, where you basically set a fixed level of effort and you go as long as you can until you literally say, I can't go any longer. And the brain train group basically went 5 minutes longer than the control group in the hardest part of the effort, showing that adaptation was meaningful in terms of their ability to handle more cognitive and physical stress.
Right. Oh, so I mean, I'm not sure exactly. I'm not the scientist of the rehab neuroscientist to this, but how that could apply to there's just so many possibilities how they could apply it to brain injury and just recovery, rehabilitation. But that also leads us to the second pillar, which is diagnose, which doesn't mean diagnosis the medical sense, but it's readiness is so readiness is what we have written here and what I've seen there, and also what I've learned about. But what do you mean? What does the Rewire Fitness app mean when you talk about readiness and diagnose and for readiness?
Yeah, exactly. It's a great question. What we consider to be readiness is holistically looking at the person's well-being from a physical, cognitive, and emotional state. How ready are they to face the challenges they need to on a given day? So what our system does is basically it collects a bunch of data passively, so it'll bring in things like your resting heart rate and HRV from a variety of apps and products. It'll bring in your sleep data as well from things like Oura Ring. And then it'll take all of that physical information and it will combine it with a real-time cognitive test, which is called a reaction time test. It's actually the technical name is a psychomotor vigilance test. And essentially what that is when you see a shape on the screen, you tap on it, and what it's doing is recording your reaction time compared to your baseline, recording lapses. Lapses would be for a moment you lose attention and you're slow to respond, and a miss would be you're anticipating something and you press it before the shape appears. So we look at all of those measures as well as accuracy down to the millisecond. And so we can tell if somebody is 5, 10, 15, 20% off their normal cognitive performance. And that you'll see this same protocol used in sleep studies. It's also used in the military. It's a strong indicator of cognitive fatigue or other cognitive issues. So that's how we bring in the cognitive data. And then on the subjective or emotional side, we use a scientifically validated scale that's used by NASA for astronauts. And it basically is a very accurate correlative questionnaire to your emotional state. So we combine all that information, your physical, your cognitive, and your emotional. We give you an overall score. But more importantly, we break it down so that on a given day, like today, I have a high emotional state, high cognitive state, but physically drained. Yesterday, it was the reverse. And you can't always, as a person, detect, wow, I'm cognitively
Yeah.
fatigued today or emotionally, you don't always notice those signals as well. So what we want to do is give that information to the person so they have a better understanding of how they're doing today, and then give them some tools to make the best of it.
So does cognitive or emotional well-being just always mean you feel, well, I'm cognitive and more emotional? You always feel happy, or you're just in a better focus, better mind? Like, I don't know.
Yeah,
how would you define
yeah,
that?
yeah. So we also want to be reasonable in terms of sort of how many things we ask people to do, because of course we could ask 20 questions, but we focus on these specific questions that are correlated to the ability for the person to perform on a subjective sort of scale. So for example, we'll ask your level of frustration today. If you have a higher than normal level of frustration, whatever it is, for example, for me, I never report a frustration level unless there's a big deal, like something's really happening.
Yeah.
And when I do, I don't, on a scale from 0 to 100, I'll say like a 3. For
Yes.
me, that's a big deal. For another person,
I gotcha.
they may say 20 every single day.
Yeah.
So
No.
the system is looking specifically at what your normal variation is, and it goes, uh-oh, red flag.
Yeah.
And if, the reason that you get, frustrated or have a higher level of emotionality is because you're under cognitive fatigue, and essentially you're impacted by the ability to control those emotions. So like in general, even if you're not using our app, if you notice that you're a little bit more frustrated today for not good reasons, like something silly happens and you get really mad, or you're just really emotional and wound up,
Yeah.
that's a good sign that you're also going under, you have some cognitive fatigue or cognitive challenges today that are impacting your ability to sort of stay calm.
Which leads very well to which I guess probably leads to your third pillar of recover. So if you are feeling, which I mean is obviously very important for brain injury concussion patients to learn about recovery and to monitor their own how they're feeling every day and how they recover from the last day or the last second, the last hour. But could you describe how recover fits in these three pillars of the system?
Yeah, exactly. Recover is really designed to be an on-the-spot intervention when you need it. And so we base that on, in part by your readiness score. So because we can break down at a pretty granular level your cognitive, emotional, and physical state, we'll have a sense for what would be helpful for you. And then we also give you a menu of a lot of different types of modalities and options that you can pick from if you're trying to de-stress, if you're trying to literally recover physically and mentally, if you're preparing for some competition, or you have a speaking engagement, or you have something that's stressing you out. We have sort of systems for all of that, and we put it together in what we call a recipe. So we'll take that information based on what we know about your state today, and we'll combine a breathing modality. We might bring in a box breathing, which is a famous Navy SEALs technique to basically activate your physiology for recovery, but also maintain focus. It's great for stress management. We might bring in pranayama breathing. We might bring in 478. We can bring in any kind of breathing style depending on the need. And so obviously that's telling your body, hey, you can get into a homeostasis, calm down. So that's going to help on the physical side. It does have some other benefits as well, but primarily on the physical side. And then on the emotional side, we bring in techniques like self-talk, which you can program or use what we have. And self-talk would be, simple phrases that remind you, what's important, that give you inspiration, that give you grounding. So like one of the ones that one of our first beta athletes use is strong and focused. When she's in a competition, she's an ultra runner, she'll say that to herself, just literally like a mantra over and over again. And that's a cue to your brain that if you're doing that in training and you do that in competition, it's a cue to your brain that this is the state I want to be in. This is the mindset I want to be in. We'll also bring in things like visualization. And then the other more subconscious techniques will bring in binaural beats, which are basically two-tone frequencies, which create what's known as brain entrainment, where your brain perceives a low-level frequency and it tries to mirror the frequency that it's perceiving. So we'll mimic a sleep state or a meditative state or a focus state, and that actually has a material effect on your,
Really?
so I'll give you an example.
I've heard someone talk about binaural beats before, but I didn't really.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. Essentially, what happens is you have to wear headphones. You when you're listening to binaural beats, normally it's a very annoying sound because there's a lot of like cyclical, like vibrational sort of sounds. But we worked with a PhD audio engineer and blended it in with music so you don't hear it, which is good. But basically, you have one tone coming in one ear, another tone coming in the other ear. And what your brain does is it basically samples those together, which makes a third frequency. And that frequency is the one that mirrors a brain state, which is a super low, like 2 hertz, for example, frequency, super, super low. And your brain's going to pick that up and go, hey, this is just like my sleep state. And it starts to mirror that. So one of the studies, what they did is they basically took a set of people that were experienced meditators and another set that had no experience meditating. They had both groups do 90 minutes of these cognitive tasks, like the ones we have in our app, for example, where they're just really overloading their brain. 90 minutes is very hard, by the way. And then they measured their cognitive fatigue. They're like, okay, these guys are cooked. And then they had the meditators go off and meditate for 15 minutes, and the non-meditators listen to binaural beats. And to their surprise, the people that listened to the binaural beats actually had a greater level of recovery on the cognitive side than the meditators. So fascinating stuff. And what's exciting about it to me is that, meditation is not always accessible to everybody. It can be a difficult practice. But if all you have to do is put earbuds in and listen to music that's already relaxing, it's pretty easy. Like anybody can do that, So the last piece is right out of science fiction. Basically, what we do is we take advantage of the sort of low-level biology of a human being, where we have a fight or flight mechanism. A lot of it is mitigated through what's called the vagus nerve, which is a cranial nerve that goes through all your primary organs. And it actually connects to the muscles of the face. And what the researchers believe is it does that because we're social animals. So we're taking fight or flight cues off looking at each other's faces, just like a herd would. If there's something dangerous and they see the body language of one animal, they're going to all react just based on seeing that one animal move. Likewise, if I was looking at you and I started like freaking out, you may or may not believe that it's a legitimate freak out, but your biology is going to go, okay, this is not a safe place. Let's get ready for fight or flight if we have to.
Yeah.
And so what we do is the opposite. We prime the person subliminally while they're looking at the screen with smiling faces. So in sports psychology, a lot of coaches will say, smile.
Yeah.
Well, there's some science behind that, because when you smile, you're basically stimulating your vagus nerve and you're telling it, hey, we're okay, everything's good. And what that does is it helps with cognitive fatigue. Obviously, can get you into a positive mindset, and all those factors then can reduce sort of how you perceive difficulty or the perception of effort, as we call it. So pretty fascinating stuff, and it's all sort of combined dynamically based on what the person needs that day.
Right. So it sounds like there's certainly a lot of science has gone behind this, and And I know like it sounds like a lot of these physical recovery, it's obviously very almost entirely mentally focused. But so the athlete elite, like it sounds like it's for almost elite athletes, but it's not for athletes of any caliber who just want to, or just not necessarily athletes, but even more than just athletes. Mostly, I mean,
Yeah.
athletes will find the most immediate benefit from it, but sounds just for just anybody can use it. Anybody who wants to really delve deep into their mindset, how they're mentally resilient, and how to recover, and if they're ready for the day, whatever challenges to come. So
Yeah.
it's not just for elite athletes, is it?
No, I'm really glad that you brought that point up, because when we first started talking about our product and our business, and when we talk to people, they would say, "Oh, well, this is only for like the top 0.1%." We're like,
Yeah.
no, actually, the average, what we call and what Strava calls the committed athlete, which is basically just someone who cares about getting better. Maybe they're working out 2 or 3 times a week and they want to see progress, and they're spending, you could argue, their more precious time than a professional, because they don't have a lot of time. They have their work, they have their family, they have other responsibilities. So they're taking probably their most precious time, free time, and committing to getting better. So it's meant for them. We do have a lot of professionals that use it, but they're obviously looking for that, last little bit of performance. Whereas with the average person, there's a lot of benefits to be had from this. For example, I consistently every day, I'll do a mindset recovery session, really just for stress management.
Okay.
Middle of the day, I want to hit the reset button, and I just want to, feel a little refreshed and ready to focus again. And so I'll do a 2 to 5 minute session. We have frontline workers that use the tool, for all the stress that they're going through. And
Nowadays, yeah.
yeah, they go through just an incredible amount of stress. We have people that they're just interested in, being healthier.
Yeah.
Like if you think about how your mind can cycle and negatively impact your entire day, if you had a tool to just help, and that's what meditation's for. That's essentially, one of the things we do. If you had a tool to be able to understand, get a perspective on where you're at, and then understand how to deal with it, it really helps you. Doesn't even matter if you're an athlete, it just helps you feel better and be healthier. So
Well, that's why I'll give you this time now to talk about just what anything else they like to add on that they just say, but also to where can people get this app, when can they get it, where can they find out more, all of that, and where they're going to read more, or see they can share on Twitter, Facebook, whatever social media. I shouldn't see the names, but like any social media that want to about Rewire Fitness. So where can they find out more about this?
absolutely, yeah. Thank you. They can check out our website, which is rewirefitness.app. If they go to /join, rewirefitness.app/join, they can take advantage of some, we're a pretty new product, so they can take advantage of some discounts. And then they can find us across social media at Rewire Fitness, on Instagram, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, all Rewire Fitness. And they could also check out our podcast. We interview scientists and athletes, and we have the first few podcasts we internally break down a lot more detail than we've discussed today. So if anybody really wants to nerd out, they can check out the first few episodes. We go very deep on technically how everything works. But it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I really appreciate it.
It's been great, and I've learned a lot about just how this whole train and diagnose, you got to recover, how it all can work together and to improve just not just not just athletes and just every day, and even potentially some stranger concussed athletes can take some solace in some of these, take some advice from some of this stuff as well. So Thank you so much, Sun.
Thank you.
Music at the beginning of this podcast is by Ben Sound. www.bensound.com.